about the pose, that I hesitate to be too negative about it because overall I like this shot a lot. Um, but there's something about the believability of this pose in this setting. It seems a little bit more like a fashion pose, and this setting is such a natural setting. Um, I could see this sort of being maybe catalog fashion or something. And that's the one thing I would say, is this something that somebody would be doing one hand down and the hand behind the head, and maybe playing around with just a pose that's a little bit more editorial. It's nitpicking in some respects. It's just my personal take on that aspect of the pose. And then if we're talking about perfect world improvement, there are really a couple of things here that I'd like to change. Um, as much as I'm fine with all of this light on the background, that's become pretty traditional actually, even backgrounds that are totally blown out. This real hotspot from the sun right in here, it's a flat space shape. It's right next to the model. It repeats again in here twice, and it really starts to dominate. This is almost right in the middle of the image. It's a flat space shape and it's very bright, and I'd like to make that go away. It could have been really difficult to scrim this off without some kind of a big parachute or scrim rig or something. And shooting 78 millimeters here and getting this much of the environment, it'd be almost impractical. Uh, Potentially impractical without a bunch of gear and assistance to make that go away. It's much easier to just make it go away inside of Photoshop. I'm just going to come in and grab some information here and patch it. Essentially, I'm going to do a rough job of that, but we'll just see the difference in just a second. The other thing is, I've already mentioned there's so much symmetry, color symmetry, symmetry in the pose, these two trees. To me, just this one cutoff line in the corner is not enough to carry the symmetry. I would be inclined to copy this guy, flip him, bring him over here, change him a little bit, and create a stronger feeling of it, in the same way the greens are bookending the warms in here, that the trees are bookending the whole shot to go with a bookended pose. And so let's just look at those two things. Here's a layer where I sort of went half of the way there. I patched up the bright spot and started to work on the tree over there, and then I kept going with that idea, and I did a little bit of digital gardening. I came in and I got rid of a few things that don't look like leaves so much as they just sort of are high contrast sort of distractions, and there's that layer. So here's both of them combined. See what you think about that. To me, this makes quite a big difference in the way that I look at this image. And like I said, this isn't perfect. It needs help, but it's enough to give us the idea. And then the next thing that I did was I opened up the image almost everywhere with the exception of these areas right here. Um, Let me back up for a second. I sort of forgot to point something out. Another thing that I did on this layer, and you can see it, I toned down those highlights. You're only going to be able to go so far with that before it's going to start to look whack. You're going to flatten those highlights out to the point where they'll look gross, and it'll take a lot of work to come in and sort of create local contrast that's believable. So another thing that you could do is, instead of just continuing to try and darken this, you can lighten everything else up so that this doesn't have as much weight. And I also think the model could be a little bit more open. If she's brighter, she'll come forward a little bit more here. So that is what I did on that layer. You can see what you think of that. Here's where we are so far. And then add a little bit more pop to the highlights on the model, where the light's hitting the pants and where it's hitting the shirt. Very, very subtle. And then this layer, I almost hesitate to show this now because I've been going for a long time, but I'll just show it real quick. If I zoom in here, a lot of times people have one eye that's bigger than the other. It's a pretty natural phenomenon. And if I'm working on portraits, where it's more of a posed, formal kind of portrait, a lot of times I'll do something to correct for that. And so I just wanted to show something here. I just did that by scaling that eye up a little bit. It's a real small detail here, but just in case you don't know this, that you can do this. If you're scaling something that's really small and you don't want to sit there and pull on those controls on a real small box or have to zoom way in, if you go to Edit, Transform, Scale, you can come up here and change these values, which is what I did here. I just put in 104, 105, 106% and played around with changing the width and the height and the percentage box to make that change, and it turned out that 104% was what I ended up liking as far as the change. So here's where we started, and here's where we ended up. You can see what everybody thinks. A really beautiful portrait from Jan. beautiful color, beautiful model. Jan's done a great job here of working with lighting on location, beautifully seen location. I think an excellent choice for a portrait like this. Just a great, beautiful, rich from a color standpoint overall location portrait. And we want to say a big thank you to Jan for sharing this image on the Mindful Eyes Daily Critique. See you tomorrow, everybody.